Imagine standing on a narrow strip of land where the fate of the ancient world is about to be decided. In front of you, 10,000 Persian Immortals, the most feared elite force ever assembled by an empire that stretched from India to Egypt. Behind you, only 200 Spartans and their allies, outnumbered, surrounded, and fully aware that retreat means extinction. This is not a story of numbers. This is a story of defiance. This is the moment when a handful of men chose honor over survival and shook an empire that believed itself invincible. This is 1,000 Spartans against an empire. Before we march into battle, subscribe for cinematic history documentaries that bring the ancient world to life. If you respect warriors who stood against impossible odds, like this video. And write a comment telling us where you're watching from, because this story belongs to the whole world. Now, let us return to a time when steel spoke louder than crowns. By the early 5th century BCE, the Persian Empire was not just powerful, it was unstoppable. Under King Xerxes IV, Persia commanded unimaginable wealth, endless manpower, and absolute confidence. Cities fell without resistance. Kingdoms bowed without battle. To the Persians, Greece was not a threat. It was a rebellious inconvenience. Xerxes did not march west seeking a fair fight. He marched to erase defiance. His army moved like a living continent. Engineers building bridges over seas, slaves flattening mountains, scribes counting soldiers not in thousands but in hundreds of thousands. And at the heart of this force marched the Immortals, 10,000 elite Persian warriors always kept at full strength. When one fell, another immediately replaced him. To the world, they seemed eternal. Immortal in number, immortal in reputation, immortal in fear. Greece, meanwhile, was fractured. City-states argued, kings schemed. Politicians debated while an empire approached their shores. Many chose submission, some chose silence. Very few chose resistance. But in the south, in a land where weakness was considered a crime, one city-state prepared differently. Sparta. A society built not on art or trade, but on war. Where boys were taken from their families at age 7. Where pain was training. Where death in battle was not tragedy, but duty. Sparta did not ask how large the Persian army was. They asked only one question: where will we fight them? The answer was Thermopylae, a narrow mountain pass between cliffs and sea, a place where numbers meant nothing, a place where discipline, formation, and courage could defy an empire. The Spartans knew the prophecy. They knew a Spartan king must die for Greece to survive, and King Leonidas did not hesitate. He did not bring Sparta's full army. He brought only 200 men, warriors who had already accepted death. This was not a march to victory. This was a march to legend. As the Persian army approached like a storm swallowing the horizon, Leonidas and his men took their positions. Bronze shields locked, spears leveled. Hearts steady, they were not afraid, because fear had been beaten out of them long before this day. And as Xerxes' messengers arrived, demanding surrender, Leonidas's answer would echo through history. Come and take them. This was the silence before the thunder. The moment before blood-soaked stone, the instant when history held its breath. Because next, steel would meet flesh, empires would bleed, and immortals would learn that men who choose death are impossible to conquer. At dawn, the earth itself seemed to tremble. The Persian army moved forward in waves, armor glittering under the rising sun, banners stretching farther than the eye could see. To Xerxes, this was not a battle. It was an execution delayed by Greek arrogance. He waited 4 days. 4 days hoping the Spartans would flee. 4 days expecting fear to do his work for him. But the Greeks did not retreat. Instead, Persian scouts reported something unsettling. The Spartans were combing their hair, laughing, exercising. To the Persians, it looked like madness. To Sparta, it was ritual, men preparing to die beautifully. On the 5th day, Xerxes lost patience. He raised his hand, and the invasion began. Persian infantry surged into the narrow pass, lightly armored men confident in their numbers. They expected the Greeks to break instantly. They were wrong. The Spartan phalanx moved as one living creature. Shields locked, spears thrust forward in perfect rhythm. The narrow pass erased Persia's advantage. Every Persian charge ended the same way. A wall of bronze, a forest of spear points, a massacre. The Spartans did not chase. They did not panic. They pushed forward, withdrew, rotated ranks, and killed with cold precision. Hour after hour, Persian bodies piled at Thermopylae. Xerxes rose from his throne, then sat back down. Rose again. then froze. This was impossible. Persian soldiers fought bravely, but bravery without discipline is slaughter. They fought individually. The Spartans fought as one. When a Spartan spear shattered, he drew his sword. When the sword broke, he used his shield edge. When weapons failed, they killed with hands and teeth. Every Spartan knew his place. Every Spartan trusted the man beside him more than his own life. This was not rage. This was training perfected over generations. Xerxes had conquered nations with fear. But fear meant nothing to men who had already accepted death. Enraged and humiliated, Xerxes made his decision. He summoned the Immortals, 10,000 elite warriors, clad in scale armor, armed with spears, bows, and unwavering confidence. These were the men who crushed rebellions, who shattered kingdoms, who had never known defeat. If anyone could break Sparta, it was them. As they advanced, silence fell over the battlefield. The Immortals expected fear. Instead, they saw Spartans smiling beneath bronze helmets. And then, the clash. The Immortals fought harder. Smarter, faster. But the past betrayed them. Their long spears were useless in the crush. Their numbers worked against them. Their armor was no match for Spartan blades at close range. The Spartans surged forward like a closing gate. Immortals fell, then more, then dozens, then hundreds. For the first time in living memory, the Immortals were dying. The name that once inspired terror now became a cruel joke. They were not immortal, they were human. And humans bleed. Xerxes watched from his throne in disbelief. His elite force, destroyed by men who refused to retreat. His strategy, humiliated by discipline. His empire, challenged by a handful of warriors who would not kneel. The battlefield became a slaughterhouse. Persian bodies choked the pass. The sea turned red. The air filled with screams, metal, and dust. Yet the Spartans still stood. Still pushed forward, still killed. And as night fell, Thermopylae belonged to the Greeks. But victory came at a cost. The Spartans were exhausted, wounded, bleeding. They had proven the impossible. But the war was far from over. Because treachery was already moving in the shadows. And the deadliest enemy was not in front of them but behind. The Spartans had done what no army in the known world could do. They had humiliated Persia. For 2 days, the greatest empire on earth had been held at bay by a wall of flesh and bronze. The name of Thermopylae was already being whispered with fear and disbelief throughout the Persian ranks. But wars are not always decided by strength. Sometimes they are decided by betrayal. His name was Ephialtes, a Greek, a countryman, a man who saw opportunity where others saw duty. Ephialtes knew of a hidden mountain path, an ancient goat trail that curved around the cliffs of Thermopylae, a path that bypassed the Spartan wall entirely. For days he hesitated, then he chose silver over honor. Under cover of darkness, Ephialtes approached the Persian camp and knelt before Xerxes. He offered the one thing the Persian king desperately needed. Not strength, not numbers. A way around Sparta. Xerxes did not hesitate. At once he ordered the Immortals, what remained of them, to follow Ephialtes through the mountain pass. The trap was set. Before dawn, Greek scouts felt something was wrong. The wind carried unfamiliar sounds. Footsteps where none should be. Metal brushing against stone in the darkness. Soon the truth reached Leonidas. The Persians were behind them. The pass was lost, escape was still possible. And that is when Leonidas made the decision that would define history. Leonidas gathered the Greek commanders. He did not beg, he did not command. He offered a choice. Those who wished to leave could do so, while there was still time. No shame. No dishonor, many accepted. The allies withdrew to warn Greece of what was coming. But Leonidas and his Spartans remained. Not because they were trapped, but because Sparta had been taught one truth since birth. A Spartan does not retreat. With Leonidas stood 300 Spartans. Alongside them, 700 Thespians who refused to abandon their king. And a small force of Thebans, uncertain but present. In total, less than 1,000 men. Facing an empire, they knew the outcome. They sharpened swords already dulled by blood. They bound wounds that would reopen. They shared final words. There were no speeches. They did not need them. They had been preparing for this moment their entire lives. As dawn broke, the Persians attacked from both sides. The Greeks charged forward, not back. They fought with fury, no longer conserving strength. Every blow was meant to kill. Every step forward was taken with death in mind. Leonidas fought at the front, not as a king, but as a Spartan. When Persian arrows darkened the sky, they advanced. When spears shattered, they drew blades. When blades failed, they fought with bare hands. Leonidas fell, surrounded by enemies, and the Spartans went mad. They fought to reclaim his body, slaughtering anyone who stood in their path. 4 times the Persians were driven back. 4 times the Spartans reclaimed their king. Finally, arrows rained without mercy. The Spartans retreated to a small hill, forming one final circle. No shields remained, no formation. Only defiance. They fought until spears were broken, until swords were gone, until hands could no longer move. And when the last Spartan fell, the battlefield fell silent. The Persians had won the ground, but they had lost something far greater. They had lost the illusion of invincibility. Thermopylae was over, but its echo had just begun, because Greece had been awakened, and Persia had just created its most dangerous enemy. Thermopylae was over, the pass had fallen. The Spartans were dead. The road into Greece lay open. By every rule of war, Persia had won, and yet something had gone terribly wrong. Xerxes walked among the bodies. Thousands of Persian dead lay scattered across the narrow ground. Immortals, once untouchable, now rotted in the dust beside common soldiers. The king ordered Leonidas' body be found, not to honor it, but to defile it. His head was severed. The body was crucified. It was an act of rage, because kings do not mutilate enemies they respect. They mutilate enemies who humiliate them. Before leaving Thermopylae, the Greeks carved words into stone, words that would outlive empires. Go tell the Spartans, stranger passing by, that here, obedient to their laws, we lie. No boast, no apology. Just truth. This was not written for Sparta. It was written for history. News of Thermopylae spread faster than Persian cavalry. The story was not told as a defeat. It was told as proof. Proof that Persia could be stopped. Proof that gods did not walk among the immortals. Proof that free men fighting for their homes could challenge an empire. City-states that once argued now listened. Athens prepared its fleet. Themistocles accelerated naval construction. Corinth and Plataea rallied men. Thermopylae bought Greece something priceless: time. Leonidas had not marched to win. He had marched to delay. Every hour Persia bled in the pass was an hour Greece prepared. The Spartans had traded their lives for unity, and it worked. Months later at sea, Persian confidence returned. Xerxes believed his navy would crush Athens. But at Salamis, Greek ships lured the Persian fleet into narrow waters, just like Thermopylae. Numbers failed Persia again. Discipline triumphed again. And as Persian ships burned, the ghost of Leonidas stood on every deck. Thermopylae had taught Greece how to fight an empire. The final blow came at Plataea. This time, Greek army stood united. Spartans led the charge, not outnumbered, not alone. The Persian army broke. The invasion collapsed. Xerxes fled back to Asia, leaving behind wreckage, corpses, and a lesson written in blood. Empires fall not when they lose battles, but when they awaken resistance. Thermopylae was not about winning. It was about choosing how to lose. The Spartans taught the world that some defeats are stronger than victories, that courage can outlive death, that numbers do not decide history, choices do. That is why centuries later armies still speak of Thermopylae. That is why its story refuses to fade. Because men who die for nothing are forgotten, but men who die for meaning become immortal. Thermopylae did not stop Persia. It changed the future. And the final truth remains: the Spartans lost the battle, but they won forever. Empires do not collapse in a single moment. They crack first and in the mind. Thermopylae was not just a battlefield. It was a psychological earthquake. For the first time, the Persian war machine hesitated. Before Thermopylae, Persian soldiers believed resistance was pointless. After Thermopylae, they whispered about Spartans who fought without retreat, about warriors who smiled before battle, about men who charged into death like it was a homecoming. Fear had changed sides. The Persian army still marched, still conquered cities. But something vital was missing: confidence. Sparta never believed war was about survival. It was about duty. From childhood, Spartans were taught a single idea: you are already dead. When fear no longer controls you, power loses meaning. This is why bribes failed, why threats failed, why Xerxes' promises of wealth meant nothing. Sparta had already taken everything from its warriors: comfort, family, softness. What remained could not be taken. Xerxes had men, Sparta had meaning. The Persian king commanded obedience through fear. Leonidas inspired loyalty through example. One demanded kneeling. The other walked into death first. History always chooses the second. Within a generation, Thermopylae stopped being a battle. It became a standard. Roman generals studied it. Revolutionaries quoted it. Soldiers whispered it before impossible missions. Not because it was successful, but because it was honest. It showed the true cost of freedom. The Immortals were never meant to be gods. They were meant to be feared. Thermopylae destroyed that illusion. Once an enemy bleeds, they can be beaten. Once beaten, they can be defeated. Once defeated, they can fall. That truth terrifies every empire. The Spartans were not monsters. They were husbands, fathers, sons. They wrote letters knowing they would never be read. They joked to hide fear. They felt pain like anyone else. What made them different was not strength. It was choice. They chose to stand. If Thermopylae had failed completely, if Greece had surrendered, democracy may never have survived. Philosophy may never have flourished. Western civilization may have been shaped by kings, not citizens. One stand changed everything, not because it won, but because it refused to submit. Thermopylae reminds us that history is not written by the strongest, but by those who decide what is worth dying for. History is cruel to the forgotten. Empires rise, empires fall. Names fade into dust, but some stories refuse to die. Thermopylae is one of them. No one remembers the names of the Persian generals who died at the pass. But the world remembers Leonidas. Because history does not preserve numbers, it preserves meaning. The Spartans did not fight to be remembered. They fought because they believed some lines should never be crossed. And when that line was challenged, they stood. Thermopylae is not about ancient armor or forgotten kings. It is about moments when the odds are unfair, when surrender feels logical, when standing your ground feels impossible. Every generation faces its own empire. Sometimes it wears a crown. Sometimes it wears an idea. Sometimes it wears fear itself. The Spartans teach us that resistance does not begin with victory. It begins with refusal. Real heroes are not fearless. They are faithful, faithful to values, faithful to each other, faithful to a cause greater than survival. Leonidas did not promise his men glory. He promised them honor, and that was enough. We tell Thermopylae because it reminds us that courage is contagious, because it shows that even in defeat, dignity can win, because it proves that one stand, no matter how small, can echo across centuries. Empires crumble, but ideas march on. The Persians believed immortality came from numbers. The Spartans proved it comes from choice. Their bodies fell at Thermopylae, but their stand became eternal. Go tell the Spartans. Those words were not written for Sparta. They were written for us. A reminder that obedience to conscience matters more than obedience to power, that some defeats shape the future more than victories ever could. Somewhere between the cliffs of Thermopylae and the silence of history, a truth remains. When men stand together for something greater than themselves, they never truly die. If this story moved you, subscribe for more cinematic history documentaries. Like this video to honor those who stood against impossible odds. And write in the comments where you're watching from, because courage belongs to every corner of the world. This was 1,000 Spartans against an empire, and their stand still marches with us.